Hello listeners, Jacob Sachs-Mishalanie here in Brooklyn, New York. I'm going to live code a track for you with Max MSP and Ableton. Thanks so much to Umanesimo Artificiale for inviting me to contribute a video to this series. So let's take a look right here. This is the main patch I'll be using. It's a sequencer I've been working on for a couple of weeks. Inspired by Mark Fell and his album Multi-Stability. Started this project after teaching a class on FM synthesis at Brooklyn College a few weeks ago, which gave me an opportunity to dig into his music and his writings about his music. So the main concept that I took away from his music is to have a table in the sequencer that determines the duration of each individual step. So to do a quick demo, if we draw a straight line across here, turn it on, all the steps are going to be about the same speed, right? But if we put a couple steps lower on the table, they're much faster, and a couple steps higher on the table, they're much slower. So interesting thing with this is that when you change the duration of an individual note, it stretches or compresses the duration of the entire sequence. So you can make these really interesting rhythmic patterns that are non-metrical, right? They're not going to fit within the normal divisions of bars and meter and individual beats and things like that. So we have our durations table. The next table is going to set the number of times each step is repeated. So right now, all these are set at the bottom. So no step is being repeated. Let's have our fast step again. But now if we put the first step up high, it's repeated a bunch of times before it moves on. So we can also have these steps will all be repeated twice. This one will be repeated a bunch of times. So you can build some interesting rhythmic patterns there. This table, the third table, is going to be the rhythmic, the melodic contour. And then this fourth table over here only comes into play when a step is repeated. So this one can be turned on and off. So we'll turn it on for now. What happens is if a step is repeated, rather than repeating the same note from this third table X number of times, it's going to walk through this contour, which will be added to that note. So let's try it out. We'll make a nice ascending contour. We'll have everything repeated 3 times. So you can see that the overall pattern is ascending because this table is ascending, but we keep hearing this 3-note little motive that's repeated. Let's change it to everything repeated 4 times. That was a funny one. Okay, so anyway, that's how this overall sequencer works. This last table randomly regenerates every once in a while. So that's just going to spit out a bunch of little contours that it will walk through, and I don't really need to think about it. We also have another table, which is just like the starting note table, kind of a normal sequencer over here. That's just going out a separate MIDI channel we'll send it to some drums. So that's our main sequencer patch. I also have this patch here, which is going to determine the structure of the piece. It's kind of like the sequencer patch, but it's just applied to a larger scale of durations, right? So it's going to randomly generate sets of durations, but instead of applying it to sort of like note-to-note rhythms, it's applying it to sections overall. So you set the overall duration of the structure, so we could do 4 minutes or whatever, and then each of these channels is going to be mapped to some parameter in Ableton. So we'll just send it to CC channels, MIDI CC channels. The way it works is each of these tables up top is going to randomly generate 3 durations that add up to the total duration. And then that will determine how this particular channel walks through a collection of settings for that particular parameter. So for example, this first one we might map to the volume of a particular synthesizer, and we'll set 4 different volume settings here. And once we start the process, it will gradually walk from this setting to this setting to this setting, etc. So the idea with this patch overall is that we can plan the narrative of the piece by planning these settings and how it will progress through 4 settings for each parameter in Ableton. But rather than having all of the settings kind of change at the same time, so a big blocky structure where you notice these big changes, it's going, each parameter will walk through its arc of settings at its own rate. So rather than having these big blocky changes, it will sort of inch its way along, each setting kind of making its own move at a time. Sometimes they'll be in sync, sometimes they'll be out of sync, but it will just sort of blur the lines of that, of what would otherwise be a kind of a blocky structure. So this is a patch, work in progress. I'm still messing around with it, but hopefully we can do something cool with it today. All right, so main patches. We've got our rhythm patch. We've got our structure patch. Now we'll go over into Ableton. The Ableton session, all the sounds will come from here. We've got our top tracks up here, which is just going to basically organize and record the MIDI coming in. And then we've got 3 tracks down here where the sounds will happen. Let's start by putting some MIDI effects on the incoming MIDI. I'll turn the sequencer on. Have a sip of water. I'm going to start with, let's see, the scale device from Ableton. I use just the C major preset, and then I'll put the chord device before that. So the scale device is going to make everything diatonic. The chord, we can make these cluster chords, but because it's before the scale, it will stay diatonic even if it otherwise wouldn't be. Let me adjust this so we can, there we go. Okay, so there's our first couple of things. We're now going to pop the LFO on. So this is the Max for Live default LFO. We can map that to the root note of the scale object, slow it down, and give it a random contour. So the idea with this is that it's going to randomly change keys occasionally. Always diatonic, but we'll have different major keys. Next device is a Max for Live device I made, which is going to randomize a few things about the MIDI. So we can randomize the velocity of every note. I made this before I knew there was an Ableton device that already did this, but I like mine just fine. And we can also randomize the pitch bend, which I like to do, probably do it too much, but this just gives a nice, slightly warbly, out of tune sound. Okay, so there's our MIDI effects. Let's start building up some synths now. So over here, I like this analog, just plain sine wave with a nice percussive envelope. I'm gonna group it, and we'll just make a big composite, add some other stuff in there. So I'm gonna add operator, the FM synth in Ableton. I think I should probably tone down the pitch bend a little bit. Okay, so back to operator, and I want this to be similar to the sine wave sound, but I just want to have a nice percussive attack on it, really bright attack. Nice, but super, super short. Just to have that nice click right at the beginning. And then, let's see, let's pan these left and right. Nice. I'm gonna add an LFO over to that original one. Again, just to exaggerate the kind of out of tune sound. Let's also do, this might be too much. I have to make these notes a little bit longer. So that's just changing the duration of the MIDI notes. And then we're going to use the Ableton default like Rhodes type piano. Let's solo it for a second. Nice bright right sound. Okay. I like this. I'm turn the FM down a bit. A little more balanced. Great, okay. Let's find a couple percussion samples to throw in samplers here. Here's my sample library. Oh, we'll get to that in a second. Percussive, I want a kick drum. Just build up this nice composite percussive sound. Let's add the wood block sound. I've been, slow this down. I've been really liking the Ableton orchestral percussion woodblock sounds. There's some funny ones. Love the vibra-slap. I just want this for now. And I'm gonna pitch it way down. Great, so there's our first composite instrument. I think this is plenty. I'm not quite done. There we go. And then let's just again tone down the pitch bend a bit. It's fine. I like this. Okay, great. Next channel, we'll throw the 808 on. And I'm going to tune down the snare and the hats really quick. Turn that down. All right, let's see how these go. Wonderful. Okay. Now, last thing we're going to do, we're going to add a field recording in. We're going to add this ambient field recording from the beach. It's nice and long. It's nice and bright. We can loop it and just sort of let it go. So what I'm going to do with this, though, I'm not just going to let it play plainly. Stop this for a second. I have a Max for Live device I've been working on, which is a tuned EQ. And so what this does is it's 8 really narrow EQ bands. That they're narrow enough where when you send a noisy sound through the EQ, it resonates a specific pitch out of it. And then what this device specifically does is it will set the center frequency of the 8 bands via MIDI from a MIDI track so that you can kind of play pitched sounds out of a noisy recording. So let's add on this original MIDI track, we're going to add a separate device which sends MIDI. Nice. And now you hear the kind of texture of that sound, but it's resonating the pitched sounds that are going to synchronize with the other synthesizers. Another thing is we can turn up the dry level of the field recording, which is going to allow us to have sort of 2 elements from the same channel. We're going to get this nice noisy percussive element, and we're also going to get this textural field recording added to it. So anyway, there's our next channel. I'm gonna throw a compressor on that because that one gets out of control really easily. Great, so here's all of our sounds. Cool. Back to our structure patch. That's the next part of this process. We're going to design the structure of this piece really quickly. Let's choose all the parameters we're going to want to mess with. We'll just do, let's see, sine level, sine release, FM level, FM release. We'll do electric level, that electric keyboard level. We'll do kick level, wood level, 808 level, field release, and field dry level. My mouse is mad at me right now. Okay, so now we'll go into MIDI map mode over here. We're gonna do our sine level first, so I'm gonna choose that parameter, adjust it in here, it mapped. Now we'll just do the rest of them real quick. So the release time for that sine synth, the FM level, the release time for the main oscillator of that synth. We're gonna go the level of the electric piano, the level of the kick, the level of the wood block, the level of the 808, the level of the dry signal of the field recording, oh, I skipped one, and the release time of the field recordings. That's everything. Now we're gonna reset all of these mapped parameters just to make sure that nothing will ever go above 0 dBs. And the 808 can be a bit softer. And then all the release times we're gonna make sure are about 2, maybe 2.5 seconds maximum. Except the field recording can be quite a bit shorter. Great. And then I just remembered something. Let's make sure that we have the maximum number of voices for these so that we can get a lot of resonance. And I think the electric piano defaults to a lot of voices. Yeah, 32. Great. Great. So now that all our mappings are taken care of, we can design the structure of the piece. So we're going to design 4 stages. I have to change a couple numbers from another time I was playing with this. Okay, we have to design 4 stages. So these sliders in these lower tables are the settings for each of these parameters in each of the 4 stages. So first we will turn on this test mode, and we're going to test the first stage of the piece. So that's the leftmost slider for each of these tables. So let's turn up the field dry level to get started. The field released, oh, we got to turn on the sequencer. This is not what we want. Something's wrong. Some of these mapping. Oh, you know what? I have this button to initialize. It's like the equivalent of on a MIDI controller if you had to turn a knob all the way to the extremes. All right, back to it. So designing the first stage. We want our signs. I want some nice sine synth. And then maybe a little bit of that electric piano too. No, I don't like that very much. Woodblock, yeah. This is good to start. Keep it light. Stage 2 of the piece. I want much drier. I still want the synths. I want the FM synth now. But we'll have short release times. I want the electric piano. I still want the woodblock. Okay, stage 2, let's go to stage 3. Let's have a ton of drums. So we'll bring in the 808. We'll bring in the kick. You know what, I want the kick in part 2 also. All right, back to part 3. 808, kick, woodblock. We'll have some dry field recording. And then stage 4, again, dry field recording, longer field release time. We'll have that electric piano again. And then I want the synths, a lot of synths with really long release times. I gotta change that. I have to change the, still just a little too much pitch bend for me. Oh, you know what? I'm just gonna change the pitch bend range of the electric. That one is the one that's bothering me. We'll just do 5. And then I can crank it up a little bit. Let's even just do 2. Yeah, I'm back there. Okay, so there's the stages of our piece. Let's do a 4-minute structure. I think that's going to work best. So now what happens is I'm going to hit this button. It's going to generate a bunch of durations, and then it will walk through these parameters all individually. So, you know what, let me stop that. I have a little... Okay, great. This we can close up. We'll hit the start button when we're ready, but otherwise this is ready to go. Ableton. We can arm all the tracks, arm automation, hit record. We are good. We'll have our sequencer down here. And let's start our piece. All right, here goes. See you on the other side. Oof. All right, that was fun. Thanks for watching. I hope this was cool. I hope this was useful. Yeah, again, thanks a lot.